Gamer Bros harassed me at a tournament. They didn't know I was their reigning champ. I'd been competing under the gamertag Void Killer for 3 years, and nobody knew the faceless champion who'd won 5 major tournaments was actually a 19-year-old girl named Ashley, which is exactly how I wanted it when I showed up to compete in person at my first LAN event. The second I walked into the tournament hall, a group of guys at the registration table started laughing and asking if I was lost, because the anime convention was next door. The tallest one, wearing a team jersey with Calvin on the back, slowly explained that this was a serious competition for professional players, not a casual Friday night where I could play Candy Crush on my phone. His friend Otto asked if my boyfriend was competing and offered to show me where the girlfriend section was so I could cheer properly without getting confused by all the complicated gameplay. When I said I was registering to compete, Calvin spit out his energy drink and said, "Oh, this is precious. She thinks she can hang with real players because she beat her little brother at Mario Kart once." Otto grabbed the registration form from my hands and read my entry out loud in a high-pitched voice, asking if I even knew what APM meant, or if I thought it was some kind of tampon brand. Kevin joined in saying I probably used a controller with pink buttons while my character wore bikini armor because that's the only way girls knew how to play. Calvin grabbed my wrist and forced my hand into position, explaining that real gamers used claw grip for better reaction times, not whatever manicure-friendly technique I probably used. He pressed down hard on my fingers until my knuckles cracked while I wanted to tell him I'd been using that exact grip since I was 12 but kept my mouth shut. Otto dumped out my equipment from my backpack, holding up my custom mouse that cost more than his entire setup, and laughing that it was probably programmed with macros because girls always needed to cheat. They started quizzing me on game knowledge while Calvin stood uncomfortably close, breathing down my neck and saying I smelled like Victoria's Secret instead of grinding ranked matches. When I rattled off the answers perfectly because I'd literally written guides on this stuff, Otto accused me of Googling on my phone and demanded I hand it over. Kevin went through my photos making gagging noises, saying he bet I had an OnlyFans where desperate losers paid to watch me play badly in lingerie. Calvin noticed my tournament badge had a competitor number and his face went red with actual anger. He grabbed it and held it up to everyone in line, screaming that diversity quotas were destroying competitive gaming. I bet she blew the organizer to get that spot, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, and my face went red, but I kept my cool because reacting would just make it worse. Calvin cornered me against the registration table and put his hand over my mouth when I tried to defend myself. Nobody wants to hear your victim complex when everyone knows you're just here to promote your Twitch stream where simps donate their rent money. His hand was pressing so hard I could taste blood from my lip catching on my teeth. Otto filmed everything while Kevin started a chant getting other guys to yell that I should go back to the kitchen. My heart was racing when Calvin pulled up the tournament bracket showing everyone that I was in their pool, announcing he was going to make an example of me. Otto said he'd already started making thumbnail art for the YouTube video called Female Gamer Gets Reality Check, with my registration photo photoshopped to show me crying. Kevin grabbed my mouse from the table and licked it slowly while maintaining eye contact, saying that's the closest I'd ever get to being touched by a real gamer, then threw it on the ground and stepped on the cable until it sparked. Then Calvin leaned in and whispered the thing that made my vision go white with rage. "After I'm done with you, I'm going to find every girl at this tournament and tell them exactly what happens when they try to invade male spaces. But first I'll make you admit on stream that women are biologically inferior at gaming because our reaction times are scientifically faster and you're all just diversity tokens for sponsorship money." The tournament organizer called our pool to the main stage, and Calvin strutted toward the computers while his friends chanted his name. My legs felt like jelly walking behind them, and my hands were trembling so badly I shoved them in my pockets to hide it, wondering if 3 years of dominating online meant nothing, because these guys had successfully made me feel like that scared 12-year-old girl who first got told she didn't belong in voice chat. This was my only chance to show those guys up. I couldn't blow it now. My feet moved toward the main stage even though every step felt wrong, and I pulled the broken mouse from my pocket where the crushed cable pressed against my palm. The tournament lights hit my face like a slap and made me squint while Calvin's group was already set up at their computers, laughing about something on Otto's phone. My hands started shaking worse, so I jammed them deeper into my pockets and forced myself to keep walking past rows of monitors and tangled cables. A tech guy in a black polo was checking connections near the stage, so I walked over and pulled out my mouse to show him the damage. The cable had burn marks where Kevin stepped on it and wires stuck out at weird angles from the plastic coating. The tech guy took photos with his tablet and typed something about equipment damage while telling me I'd need a replacement to compete. Calvin spotted me from his computer and stood up yelling across the stage that I was already making excuses before we even started playing. Otto had his phone pointed at me again while he talked loud enough for everyone to hear about how the female couldn't even set up her equipment right. Kevin shouted something about how I should have brought a backup mouse instead of just my makeup bag. My brain screamed at me to tell them I was Void Killer, but I bit my tongue because revealing it now wouldn't help if I lost to these jerks. The surprise would be my only real advantage since they already thought I was trash at the game. The tech guy kept typing on his tablet and showed me where the cable had been crushed in a pattern that proved someone stepped on it on purpose. He wrote down an incident number and said this counted as property destruction, which at least meant there was some official record. A woman in a blue event staff shirt walked over carrying a basic loaner mouse and introduced herself as Brenda McKay from Operations. She explained I could file a conduct complaint after my matches while handing me the mouse, and I noticed how her eyes stayed on Calvin's group. Another girl with purple streaks in her hair came over and said her name was Raven East, while holding out a better gaming mouse. She showed me the buttons to adjust sensitivity, and her fingers moved fast over the settings to match what most pros used. Her eyes met mine for a second, and I knew she understood what was happening without me having to explain anything. Brenda walked straight over to Calvin's group, and I heard her listing rules about filming other competitors and keeping appropriate distance from other players. She mentioned specific consequences, including getting kicked out of the venue if they kept harassing people, and Calvin rolled his eyes hard. Otto finally lowered his phone but kept glaring at me while Brenda wrote something on her clipboard. I found my assigned computer and sat down to start setting up Raven's mouse with my fingers still shaking bad. The sensitivity felt different from my normal setup, so I ran through my usual warm-up pattern 3 times trying to get it right. My muscle memory kept expecting my old mouse, and every movement felt a half-second off from what my brain wanted. The first match started loading, and my opponent's tag showed someone I didn't recognize from the pro scene. My opening moves were terrible with 2 misclicks that cost me map control in the first 30 seconds. My fingers moved to the wrong keys and my timing was completely broken while my opponent pushed their advantage hard. The first round ended with me getting destroyed, and the score counter showing a brutal gap in points. I forced myself to take a deep breath and tried to slow down my racing thoughts before the next round started. My hands were still shaking, but I made them stay on the keyboard and mouse instead of pulling back. The second round loaded, and I picked a safer strategy that didn't need perfect timing to work. My opponent kept playing aggressive, but I held defensive positions and waited for them to make mistakes. Slowly, my body started remembering how to play, even with the different mouse settings messing with my accuracy. I caught them out of position twice and converted both times into small advantages that added up. The round went longer, but I managed to take it by playing patient instead of trying anything fancy. Game 3 would decide the match, and my stomach was doing flips while the loading screen counted down. Calvin was destroying his opponent 2 computers over, and I could hear him trash-talking loud enough for everyone to notice. Otto kept looking over at my screen and shaking his head like he couldn't believe I'd won a round. The final game started, and I stuck with safe plays that I'd practiced thousands of times online. My opponent tried to bait me into bad trades, but I kept my cool and focused on the basics. Every click still felt slightly wrong, but I was adjusting faster now and landing more of my shots. The match timer counted down while we fought for control of the final objective on the map. My opponent went for a risky play that would have won instantly, but I read it coming and punished hard. The victory screen popped up showing I'd taken the match 2-1 with no style points. Relief washed over me, but I kept my face neutral since showing any emotion would just give Calvin's group more ammo. Calvin stood up from his computer and stretched his arms over his head, while his opponent just sat there staring at the defeat screen. The match timer showed 8 minutes and 40 seconds total, and Otto was already uploading highlights to his Instagram story. Kevin kept shouting about how that noob got wrecked and should uninstall the game forever, while other players turned to watch the commotion. Calvin walked past my setup and made a throat-cutting gesture at me before heading to the water fountain near the back wall. My next opponent loaded in, and I focused on the screen trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach about what was coming. The match went smoother this time, with my hands finally steady enough to hit my combos without fumbling the inputs. I took it 2-0 with basic strategies that any decent player could execute, but at least I was moving forward in the bracket. A guy with a press badge and expensive camera equipment approached my station holding a wireless microphone with a logo I recognized from streaming events. Esteban Carrillo introduced himself as a reporter covering the tournament and asked if I had a minute to discuss the incident at registration. I told him I couldn't really talk about it on record right now, but maybe we could chat after the tournament wrapped up. He nodded and wrote something in his notebook before moving over to interview the guy who just lost to Calvin about his experience. Someone tapped my shoulder and showed me their phone screen where Otto's video was already getting shared across Twitter and Discord servers. The clip showed me at the registration table with Calvin's group surrounding me, but conveniently cut off right before Kevin destroyed my mouse. The caption read, "Girl tries to play with the boys at major tournament," and already had over 3,000 views in 20 minutes. My stomach felt like it dropped through the floor, seeing how fast this narrative was spreading without any context about what actually happened. Comments were pouring in calling me an attention seeker and saying I probably sucked at the game anyway, which is why I needed special treatment. Brenda appeared near Calvin's group with her clipboard and pulled him aside for what looked like an official conversation based on her body language. She pointed at her badge and then at the security cameras while Calvin's face got redder with each word she said. He kept trying to interrupt, but she held up her hand and continued reading from what must have been the event code of conduct rules. Security guards moved closer to their setup area and positioned themselves between the players and the crowd barriers which hadn't been there before. Calvin threw his hands up and stormed back to his computer, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear about how soft gaming was getting. The bracket updated on the overhead screens showing the next round matchups, and my heart started racing when I saw my name lined up against Calvin. He immediately loaded into our game lobby and started with a cheese rush build that only works if your opponent doesn't scout it coming. My fingers moved to the defensive positions I'd practiced against this exact strategy hundreds of times in ranked matches online. The early pressure hit hard, but I held my buildings and workers safe while his units crashed against my defenses without breaking through. His all-in attack failed and left him behind in economy, which I converted into a steady advantage over the next 10 minutes. The crowd started murmuring when the score screen showed me taking game 1, because nobody expected the random girl to handle his signature aggressive opening. Calvin's face went dark, and Otto stopped filming while Kevin just stared at the screen like he couldn't process what happened. Between games, Calvin raised his hand and called for a referee, claiming my equipment needed inspection for illegal modifications. The ref walked over and picked up Raven's mouse, examining it from every angle, while Calvin insisted there must be programmed macros, giving me an unfair advantage. The ref plugged it into his laptop and ran some kind of diagnostic software that showed all green checkmarks for approved hardware specifications. Calvin slammed his palm on the desk, arguing that the test must be wrong, but the ref shook his head and marked his clipboard with the inspection results. My hands started shaking again, and I couldn't get them to stop no matter how hard I pressed them against my thighs under the desk. Raven appeared at my side and put her hand on my shoulder, whispering that she knew a technique that might help with the nerves. She told me to breathe in for 4 counts, then hold for 4, then out for 4, and she counted the rhythm quietly beside me. My inhales matched her counting, and slowly the trembling lessened enough that I could wrap my fingers around the mouse without them slipping. The ref signaled for us to ready up for Game 2, and I forced myself to focus on the loading screen instead of Calvin's angry muttering. Game 2 started, and Calvin completely changed his approach, playing defensive macro, which caught me off guard after his usual aggressive style. He picked apart every attack I tried with perfect counters and defensive positioning that showed he'd studied high-level play way more than I expected. My units kept getting caught in bad positions where his defensive structures could shred them before they could retreat. Every push I made cost me more resources than him, and the gold difference kept growing wider with each failed attack. My fingers started making small mistakes from the pressure, and I clicked on the wrong unit twice in crucial moments. The crowd behind us got quieter as they watched the score shift heavily in his favor, and I could feel their eyes on my back. Calvin leaned back in his chair with this smug look spreading across his face as he systematically destroyed my main base. The final push came, and I couldn't hold it off with my weakened economy and scattered units. Game 2 went to him in under 15 minutes, and my hands were shaking again as the defeat screen loaded. During the break between games, this guy with a press badge walked up close to where I was sitting. Esteban had been watching from the media section, and he leaned in near my ear, saying my movement patterns looked exactly like someone he'd seen before. He asked quietly if I might actually be Void Killer, but I just shrugged and looked away without answering. His eyes got this excited look like he'd just figured out something huge, and he started typing notes on his phone. Brenda came over and touched my shoulder, asking if I wanted to file that formal complaint right now before continuing. I told her I'd deal with it after this set, since Game 3 would decide who moved forward in the bracket. She nodded and walked to a spot where she could watch Calvin directly without being obvious about it. The referee signaled for us to load into Game 3, but the stream overlay started glitching with weird graphical errors. A technical pause got called, and we had to sit there staring at our frozen screens waiting for the tech team to fix it. Calvin kept muttering loud enough for everyone to hear about how delays only helped bad players who needed extra time to think. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, with just the hum of computers and occasional coughs from the crowd. My leg wouldn't stop bouncing under the desk, and I pressed my palm against my thigh to make it stop moving. Finally, the overlay got fixed, and the referee told us to resume from where we'd paused in the early game. Otto and Kevin started heckling even louder than before, even though security guards moved closer to where they were standing. Their voices mixed together into this annoying background noise, but I forced myself to focus only on my screen and keyboard. Every click had to be perfect now, since one mistake would end my tournament run right here. My fingers moved across the keys, setting up my economy while scouting his base for any early aggression signs. The game stayed even for the first 10 minutes, with both of us playing safe and building up our armies carefully. I started typing "I'm Void Killer" in the all chat, but stopped myself before hitting enter, since revealing too early wouldn't help. Better to let my gameplay speak first and save the reveal for after if I managed to win this. The mid-game fights started happening all over the map, and we traded units back and forth pretty evenly. Calvin tried to sneak an expansion, but I caught it with my scout and shut it down before it could finish. The resource advantage from denying that base started adding up slowly, and I converted it into better upgrades. Our armies crashed together in the middle of the map for what would probably be the final battle of the game. I managed to get better positioning on the high ground, and my ranged units could hit his front line without taking return fire. His units started melting faster than mine, and he tried to retreat, but I'd already sent a small force to cut off his escape route. The fight was incredibly close, but my positioning advantage made just enough difference to win the engagement. Calvin's main army got wiped out, and I pushed straight into his base while he scrambled to rebuild defenses. He typed "GG" in chat, but when I stood up to shake hands, he just turned away, muttering something about luck. The standard handshake after matches was basic etiquette, but I wasn't going to force it if he wanted to be a sore loser. Calvin immediately raised his hand, calling for officials, and started yelling that I must be using macros or scripts. He demanded they inspect my computer and review all the match logs to find evidence of cheating. His face was red and sweaty while he pointed at me saying no girl could beat him without illegal assistance. The head referee came over looking tired of dealing with false accusations, but protocol meant they had to investigate any formal complaint. I handed over Raven's mouse without arguing and stood back while they plugged it into their diagnostic laptop. The tech team pulled up my input logs from all 3 games and started reviewing them on the big screen for everyone to see. My actions per minute stayed consistent within normal human ranges, and there were no suspicious patterns indicating automation. They checked the mouse software for any programmed macros, but found only the standard DPI settings that every competitive player uses. The inspection cleared me completely after about 10 minutes of thorough checking, and the referee turned to address Calvin directly. Brenda stepped forward with her clipboard and issued Calvin an official conduct penalty for making false accusations without evidence. She explained that harassment through baseless cheating claims was specifically listed in the tournament code of conduct he'd signed. Otto kept filming everything, but now his clips included Calvin's tantrum and the officials shutting down his protests publicly. The narrative online started shifting as people shared videos of Calvin getting penalized for trying to get me disqualified after losing fairly. I pulled out my phone between rounds and started taking photos of my broken mouse from every angle, capturing the melted plastic where Kevin had stomped on the cable. The tech staff member who'd examined it earlier walked over and I asked him to look at it again while I documented everything. He pointed out specific damage patterns that showed deliberate crushing force rather than accidental damage, and I wrote down his badge number as a witness. My fingers moved quickly typing timestamps for when each incident happened, and listing everyone who saw the damage, including 2 other competitors who'd been standing nearby. The simple act of building this record made my hands stop shaking for the first time since walking into the venue. Esteban sat at a corner table typing rapidly on his laptop, and I could see him pulling up statistics about female dropout rates at gaming events. He interviewed 3 other women competitors who all described similar experiences without mentioning specific names or tournaments. His article went live within an hour with careful wording that avoided defamation, but painted a clear picture of systemic problems. The headline read, "Pattern of harassment drives female talent from competitive gaming," and already had hundreds of shares. A man in an expensive suit approached Brenda's admin desk, and I recognized the sponsor logo on his badge as Ashok Shah from one of the major hardware companies. He gestured at the crowd and spoke quietly but firmly about brand reputation and the need for visible policy enforcement. Brenda nodded and made notes while he suggested adding security specifically for feature stage matches. Within 20 minutes, the organizers had maintenance staff setting up rope barriers around the main stage area. Security guards took positions at each corner, and new signs went up listing specific prohibited behaviors with clear consequences. The buffer zone meant spectators couldn't get within 10 feet of competitors during matches. My name got called for the next pool match, and I sat down feeling the borrowed mouse respond better to my movements. Each click landed exactly where I intended, and my opening build flowed smoothly without hesitation. The opponent tried an early harassment strategy, but I scouted it perfectly and countered hard. My fingers found their rhythm and muscle memory took over completely. The second game went even smoother as I predicted every move and shut down attacks before they could develop. My final pool match was against a player I'd beaten online dozens of times, though he didn't know it. He played predictably, and I dismantled his strategy piece by piece with calm precision. The win secured my spot in bracket play, and I stood up feeling like myself for the first time all day. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, and I made the mistake of checking them. Death threats mixed with messages of support created a jarring contrast that made my stomach turn. Someone had posted my personal social media accounts, and strangers were flooding every platform. I switched to airplane mode except for brief checks between matches to see if anything urgent came through. The game client on my computer showed private messages from usernames I recognized as top players. They wrote things like, "Your macro game looked familiar," and "Keep pushing through this," without directly saying they knew who I was. Even these small anonymous supports helped ease the isolation of being the only target. A security guard approached with an iPad showing grainy footage from venue cameras. The video clearly showed Kevin's foot coming down on my mouse cable multiple times while Otto filmed and laughed. They explained they were building a case for property damage and needed my written statement about the equipment's value. Raven appeared at my shoulder during the break and suggested we get some air outside. We walked to a quiet area behind the venue where delivery trucks were parked and nobody would bother us. She told me about her first tournament where guys had hidden her keyboard before matches. I shared my story about being kicked from voice chat repeatedly when I was 12. We compared notes on the exhausting grind of constantly proving ourselves just to exist in these spaces. The shared understanding felt like finding an oasis in a desert of hostility. Something about her genuine support made me want to stop hiding, and I found myself saying the words quietly. "I'm actually Void Killer," came out barely above a whisper, but her eyes went wide with immediate recognition. She grabbed my arm and her whole face lit up with excitement before she caught herself and lowered her voice. "I knew it. Your movement patterns are exactly the same," she said, and promised to keep it secret until I was ready. Having just one person who knew the truth lifted a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me. The break ended, and I walked back inside to the admin desk where they were updating bracket seedings for the quarterfinals. My hands typed Void Killer, Ashley, into the stream tag field, and I stared at the screen for a few seconds before clicking submit. The change went live instantly, and I watched my phone light up with notifications as people started connecting my face to the name. Walking to my setup, I could hear murmurs spreading through the crowd as more people checked the stream and saw who I really was. The overlay on the main screen updated with my full identity, and the Twitch chat scrolled so fast it became a blur of messages. Some viewers typed, "No way, that's really her," while others posted screenshots comparing my gameplay from earlier matches to old Void Killer footage. My warm-up routine helped steady my breathing as I loaded into the practice range and ran through my usual drills. The quarterfinal opponent sat down across from me looking confused after checking the updated bracket on his phone. Game 1 started rough with my fingers feeling stiff, and my timing completely off on basic combos. He took an early lead while I struggled to find my rhythm and made stupid mistakes I hadn't made in years. Between games, I closed my eyes and focused on the muscle memory built from thousands of hours of practice. Game 2 went better as I stuck to safe strategies and solid fundamentals instead of trying anything fancy. My macro play slowly pulled ahead, and I took the second game with careful positioning. Game 3 came down to one final fight where I barely edged out the win through better resource management. Standing up from the computer, I noticed Calvin waiting near the hallway that led to the bathrooms. He stepped directly in my path despite the earlier warnings about keeping distance from me. His hand grabbed my shoulder and he started saying something about how I cheated, but security appeared immediately. 2 guards pulled him away while he kept shouting, and his whole group got escorted toward the exit doors. Their faces turned red with anger as they realized they were actually getting kicked out of the venue. Esteban approached with his recorder and asked if I'd give an official statement about everything that happened. I told him I'd talk after the tournament ended, but only about specific topics I was comfortable discussing. He nodded and wrote down my contact info for a follow-up interview once things calmed down. The semifinal match started 20 minutes later against a player who'd been competing professionally for 6 years. His experience showed in every decision as he picked apart my strategies and punished every small mistake. Game 1 ended quickly in his favor, and Game 2 wasn't much better despite my adjustments. I managed to take 1 game off him through an unexpected all-in strategy, but lost the series overall. 3rd place at my first LAN tournament while dealing with harassment still felt like an accomplishment worth being proud of. Brenda found me after the match with a tablet and several forms for filing the official incident report. Each section required specific details about times, witnesses, and exactly what happened with the damaged equipment. The process took forever as we went through every field and documented all the evidence I'd collected. She helped me attach the photos of my broken mouse and the witness statements from other players. A shock from one of the major sponsors walked over with a voucher for their equipment store. He explained their company was taking a stronger stance against harassment and wanted to replace my destroyed mouse. I accepted the offer while understanding this was more about protecting their brand image than actually caring. The voucher would at least get me a new mouse without having to pay out of pocket for someone else's vandalism. The tournament organizer took the main stage microphone and announced that Calvin's group had been ejected from the venue. He added they were temporarily suspended from all events pending a full investigation of today's incidents. Players throughout the venue looked up from their games as the announcement made it clear there were actual consequences. Other competitors started talking about similar experiences they'd had at previous tournaments. Back at the admin desk, I opened a document and started typing a brief statement about my identity. Each word needed to be factual and professional without giving trolls any emotional ammunition to use against me. I confirmed I was Void Killer and had been competing under that name for 3 years. The statement condemned harassment in competitive gaming without using inflammatory language or personal attacks. I mentioned the importance of creating safe spaces for all players regardless of gender or background. The final paragraph thanked the tournament staff and fellow competitors who'd shown support throughout the day. After reviewing it 3 times, I saved the document and prepared to post it on my social media accounts. My phone showed hundreds of messages, but I'd deal with those later when I had energy to sort through them. The important thing was that I'd competed, placed 3rd, and shown everyone that I belonged here. Calvin and his friends were gone, banned from the venue with their behavior documented for everyone to see. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but right now I just wanted to pack up my stuff and process everything that happened. My phone was already blowing up with notifications, so I opened Twitter first and saw my mentions split between people calling me brave and others saying I faked the whole thing for attention. The hate messages outnumbered the support 3-1, with guys posting screenshots of my gameplay claiming I must have cheated somehow. I switched my account to private and started blocking anyone with anime profile pics, sending death threats about ruining gaming. My Instagram had dozens of DM requests from random accounts with messages I didn't even want to read based on the previews. I turned on the strictest moderation settings and limited comments to only people I followed back. Setting up a press contact email took 5 minutes on my phone while muting all notifications except from my approved friends list. The tournament coordinator walked onto the main stage and started calling people up for the awards ceremony. I found a seat near the back and watched them hand out trophies for 1st and 2nd place. When they announced a special sportsmanship award, the coordinator called my name and motioned for me to come up. My legs felt weak walking up those stairs with everyone watching, but I made it to the stage. The coordinator handed me a small plaque while saying something about grace under pressure that I barely heard over my heartbeat. The trophy felt lighter than I expected, and the engraving was already smudged, but at least they acknowledged what happened. Walking back to my seat, several players nodded at me with what looked like respect, or maybe just pity. After the ceremony ended, I grabbed my backpack and headed for the exit where Raven was waiting by the doors. She pulled out her phone and we swapped Discord tags and Steam IDs for future practice sessions. "We should run some sets online next week," she said while saving my contact info. I texted my mom that everything was fine and I'd be home in a couple hours. My dad replied immediately with 17 question marks, but I'd explain everything later in person. Raven gave me a quick hug before heading to her car, and I stood there for a moment feeling less alone. The drive home passed in a blur and I crashed into bed still wearing my tournament shirt. My doorbell woke me up the next morning with a delivery guy holding a box from the sponsor. Inside was the replacement mouse, exactly the same model Calvin's friend had destroyed yesterday. I plugged it into my computer and opened my streaming software for the first time in days. My hands moved through the familiar setup process, adjusting the camera angle to actually show my face this time. The stream title read, "Void Killer Plays Ranked," and I hit the Go Live button before I could overthink it. My viewer count jumped to 300 within seconds as I loaded into my first match. The fear sat heavy in my chest, but my fingers found their rhythm on the keyboard anyway. This was my space, and nobody could take that away from me anymore. All right, that's a wrap on today's little journey. Really appreciate you hanging out and wandering through all this with me. Hope to see you back here again soon. Like the video, it helps more than you think.